And Democrats are worried that with what Trump is going to outline in this particular speech, that he may be laying the groundwork for how the results in November can't be trusted. Take a listen to what some lawmakers here had to say.
The world's most famous sore loser will deliver a primetime presidential sour grapes address to pursue his 6-year-old grievances about the 2020 election, while his war in the Middle East spirals out of control and the cost of living continues to rise for Americans across the country.
Look, we can't re-prosecute that campaign. Anytime you're looking back, you're not looking ahead, and I'm looking ahead to these elections, and the president should as well.
The bottom line is, if Trump wants to win the American people over, instead of the that he's peddling about 2020, he ought to focus on lowering people's costs, getting rid of the chaos in administration, getting rid of the corruption. This is a gambit that won't work. It shows his desperation.
All eyes will be on Trump and his speech. All eyes will be on what those findings specifically are, the facts and evidence that he is using in this particular speech to back up what he was saying. That speech expected at the top of the hour.
Okay, Julie, we'll check back with you later on in the evening. Let's turn now to J.C. Planis in Miami. He's an attorney and a former Republican representative in the Florida State House. Thank you for joining us this evening. What are you thinking as we wait to hear what President Trump has to say?
Telling you, this is not about 2020. This is about Trump trying to steal the 2026 midterms. Whether he alleges falsely that there were non-citizens registered to vote, whether he alleges falsely that other countries tried to hack into our election systems, this is about using these things as an excuse in order to put his thumb on the scale for the election. He's trying to do that with the SAVE Act, which would stop hundreds of thousands of people from voting. This false notion that non-citizens vote and that we need to have proof of citizenship. Non-citizens don't vote. We don't see that. This voter ID is not a voter ID bill. It's a voter suppression bill because it limits what type of identification people can use. So anyone who doesn't have a driver's license or a passport is not going to be able to vote. This is about stopping people from voting in order to steal the 2026 election.
We see so many Republicans, and especially people that have been nominated by Donald Trump for kind of inner cabinet positions, refusing to say that Joe Biden won the 2020 election fair and square. You're a former Republican representative in the Florida State House. You seem quite confident in calling out the president. Why is that?
Well, now I'm a Democrat now. I'm actually the general counsel of the Miami-Dade Democratic Party. But the truth is, they all know that Biden won the election. Trump knows that Biden won the election. Trump uses this lie to motivate his people to commit violence. What we saw on January 6th was the result of Trump purposely lying after he knew that he had lost the election, because he wanted to steal the election. That was his plan to get fake electors in 2020. This is all about getting people to commit heinous acts to try to stop our democracy. He knows that people will believe it, and frankly, the people that believe it are not my worry. It's the people that know better but are still using this as an excuse to try to commit violence during our elections.
But the people who believe it, I mean, I'm surprised they're not your worry. Isn't that a real problem when people are willing to believe that an election in the United States was stolen?
It is, but the people that are willing to lie about it to commit violence is a much more dangerous thing. Yes, there are the conspiracy theorists, but at the end of the day, those aren't the ones that are storming places that are as dangerous as the ones that know better and are still doing this. Yes, the truth is that he keeps repeating a lie, and there are people that will believe anything he says, no matter what. The problem is that then now you have conspiracy theories on the left as well. We have people saying, oh, Kamala Harris really won in 2024, but, the oligarchs stole it for Trump. There's no evidence of that either. 2024 was a fair election, just like 2020, just like 2016, just like 2012 and 2008. Our systems work. Our election systems work.
So what should your current party, now that you've switched parties from the Republicans to the Democrats, what should it be doing tonight?
Now, we are monitoring this to make sure that if Trump has a plan to send ICE to precincts, that we have lawyers in place to make sure that people are not afraid to go in and vote. We have a plan to have lawyers to make sure that anyone who gets scrutinized with their identification is able to prove this. If we have to file lawsuits, we're going to, but we are going to make sure that this right to vote, that is a fundamental part of our American democracy, is protected, especially in light of these false allegations. The SAVE Act is based on false allegations. That's why we can't have the SAVE Act passed. It doesn't look like it's going to pass, but even if it did, I'm pretty sure a judge would end up freezing it and entertaining an injunction almost immediately because of the amount of people that don't have those methods of identification that are required by the SAVE Act.
J.C. Planis in Miami, and we will check back with you after the president's address. Thank you.
I'll see you guys later. Thank you.
Caroline Heldman is a professor of political science at Occidental College in California. She's also part of our special coverage here on CBC. Thank you very much for joining us. And as we await the beginning of this speech, what are you expecting?
Well, I'm expecting, as many others have said, the rehash of the big lie that the 2020 election was stolen. I think that Donald Trump has had a really hard time being out of the headlines, knocked out of the headlines by the World Cup. I also think that he is looking ahead and looking at the calendar for passing a bill. It's the SAVE Act, which he wants to pass, that's supposed to save our election in 2028 from a non-existent threat. It doesn't have much time if he wants to get it passed in the Senate. So I think it's the World Cup, and he's looking, at the calendar here. I would expect for him to provide a lot of information that is factually incorrect. We know that for the past decade, he has floated a lot of lies about our elections. And I really want to draw attention to the fact that it's a fundamental threat to our democracy, regardless of what political party you're with. If we don't have elections that we can turn to as a means of managing political conflict, then it inspires violence as alternatives, and that's what we saw on January 6th, the violent insurrection.
Yeah, it's really interesting that you'd say that. I think about that all the time. I think about a country, the United States, that is so proud, or has been so proud, of its contribution to the development of democracy. And yet, the fundamental of democracy, free and fair elections, is being attacked by Donald Trump, not based on evidence, but really with a lack of evidence. So tonight, whatever he says, that on social media, there will be divided reaction, including a lot of support. Chances are the Fox News channel will be, positive in their coverage of whatever he says tonight. Does that worry you about a divided America, how this speech will land?
It does worry me, and it worries me mostly for his loyal followers who don't believe our elections are free and fair, even though they are. The very conservative Heritage Foundation did a study of election fraud from the year 2000 to 2025, the most comprehensive study to date. And they found that over 2 billion votes have been cast that they analyzed. And they found that only a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of a fraction were people who should not have been voting, fewer than 100 cases. And so this is a non-existent issue. And yet you have millions of Americans, albeit not a majority of Americans, but millions of Americans who blindly believe that the big lie is true, right? That we have an issue with free and fair elections. And again, it just cuts at the bedrock of our democracy if we can't trust our elections, because it impedes a peaceful transfer of power. But as you note, Ian, it also turns one American on the other. And I hope that Donald Trump will provide information about outside influences fomenting this, especially on social media, because we have, the big lie is not true, but we have ample evidence that Iran and China and Russia have been running disinformation campaigns to great effect in the United States. So it'd be great if Donald Trump actually talked about the real threat here.
All right, Caroline, stand by for a sec. I'm going to come back to you actually in just a matter of seconds. But for our viewers on CBC News Network, let me tell you what the lay of the land is going to be. We are going to throw to the National on CBC News Network on at its regular time at 9 o'clock Eastern, and then our coverage of the Donald Trump speech, including the speech itself, will be on CBC's YouTube channel and also on CBCNews.ca. But it's not just going to be the speech. We're going to have analysis. We're going to have fact-checking. You've seen some of it actually on the side of the screen. That will continue. Our fact-checking team is poised and ready to go. So that's it for our coverage here from Vancouver on CBC News Network, the National, and the speech coming up next. Okay, for those of you who are watching on CBC's YouTube channel and on CBCNews.ca, let's continue our coverage as we await the speech by Donald Trump. We are told to expect that he will be speaking about the sanctity, quote unquote, of elections. And Caroline Heldman is a professor of political science at Occidental College in California. We'll continue our conversation with you until the president begins to speak. I don't know if you have much contact with students at your college or even just talking to friends and colleagues in Los Angeles, but how do people react to the kinds of things that Donald Trump says and his appointees to cabinet say about the 2020 election?
Well, I think at this point in time that it's been such a deluge of daily headlines violating, the rules and norms of the presidency that folks are pretty numb. I think that, J.D. Vance was right when he made that comment that, every day essentially in the Trump White House is like a Watergate. He's right. There are Watergate level scandals or things that would have been scandals in the 70s just happening as a matter of course. But I'll say that certainly in historian and political science circles, we have been, really terrified about the state of our democracy for the past decade. And it has only gotten worse in the sense that we have the highest office in the land, the presidency, not only concentrating power.
Okay, Caroline, I'm sorry to interrupt you. I'm just going to jump in. We're going to go to Washington now. We'll come back to you after the speech by Donald Trump.
An economic and social disaster after the worst inflation in 48 years, the wide open borders with millions and millions of people pouring in from all over the world, including criminals of all types, and 11,888 murderers, many of whom killed more than one person. We had transgender for everybody, men and women's sports, crime ravaging our cities, and the whole world was laughing at us as a nation, but not anymore. 2 years ago, our country was dead. Now, we are the hottest country anywhere in the world. America is respected like we have never been respected before. We have more money being invested in the United States than at any time in the history of our country. More Americans are working today than ever before. This week, it was announced that inflation saw the largest monthly decline in more than 6 years. Just happened. It was just given out. The media reported it, and we accept it. The best in 6 years. The tax cuts in our great, big, beautiful bill are saving hardworking families thousands and thousands of dollars, like with the provisions, no tax on tips, no tax on overtime, and no tax on Social Security for our great seniors, along with the interest deduction on a loan used to purchase a car, but only if that car is made in America, and a 100% expensing for our job-creating businesses. Our stock markets are at their highest point in many years, but we can actually say of all time. And your 401ks, pensions, and retirement accounts are setting records every single day, the highest in history. For years, we paid the highest price for prescription drugs anywhere in the world. Now we pay the lowest price under my most favored nations policy because I was able to get the rest of the world and the pharmaceutical companies to act responsibly. Drug prices are coming down by 70, 80, and 90%. TrumpRx.gov, this will ultimately reduce the cost of health care. You have to go to TrumpRx.gov and take advantage of it. But the cost of health care is coming way down because of what we've done with prescription drugs. And with Trump accounts, every child in America now has access to a tax-free investment account to save for their future. Billions and billions of dollars are being invested, put in by companies and individuals to take care of our children so that at age 18, they will have potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars in their account, and they'll get off to a great start in life. So for that, go to TrumpAccounts.gov and sign up your child or any child who'd like to sign up. Our previously wide open borders have been transformed into the most secure borders in the history of our country, with 0 illegal aliens being admitted to the United States in the past 14 months. That is 0. Nobody thought it was possible. We had the worst border in the history of our country, and now we have the best. Crime is plummeting nationwide, with the murder rate at its lowest level since 1900, or more than 125 years ago. We're making a record investment in our armed forces, and we have the strongest and most powerful military by far anywhere in the world. I built it during my first term, and unfortunately, we're forced to use it now. We won in Venezuela, which is now working with us to produce millions and millions of barrels of oil. We are likewise winning big in Iran, and you will see the fruits of that labor very, very shortly. America is back and doing really well, but we still have a major challenge that must be urgently addressed, because no country can be great without fair and honest elections. You have to trust your country, because if there can be no trust, there can be no greatness. And that's very simple. No trust, no greatness. For many years, I've called for bold, swift, and decisive action to protect the integrity of America's elections. Every American deserves to know that when they cast their vote, that vote will be counted accurately in a system, and that is to make that system secure, one where cheating and interference are not just difficult, but virtually impossible. Unfortunately, the system we have today falls catastrophically short of that standard. Tonight, I'm announcing the immediate declassification and release of critical intelligence revealing shocking vulnerabilities in our election infrastructure. This evidence shows that the election system we have dangerously exposes, and really exposes like levels never thought possible, to hacking, exploitation, and foreign interference. Just as disturbingly, this vital information has for many years been covered up and hidden from you, the American people, our beautiful, our great American people. But that all changes right now. The documents we will release starting tonight have been gathered by the White House Government Transparency Task Force, a great group of people, along with the staff of the President's Intelligence Advisory Board, supported by our top intelligence agency chiefs, who have all personally reviewed the findings. We are presenting this evening and fully confirmed their authenticity. You can see these documents for yourself at whitehouse.gov. That's whitehouse.gov. Go check it out. Our purpose in disclosing this information is not to weaken confidence in election, but to earn that confidence by confronting vulnerabilities and correcting them very, very quickly. And that's what we're doing. The documents cover 5 major areas of concern. First, they show that over a period of years, starting during the 2020 election cycle, the People's Republic of China carried out what is believed to be the largest compromise of election data in history, resulting in China's illicit acquisition of 220 million U.S. voter files. That information includes names, addresses, phone numbers, political party preferences, and other sensitive data that would be needed to register to vote and engage in other nefarious activities, which is exactly what was happening. This data loss presents an unprecedented election security nightmare. The intelligence even shows that China assigned a data exploitation unit specifically to this new project. Compounding the travesty, the second set of documents we are releasing reveals that members of the deep state, very, very famous group of people, in many cases, in our intelligence agency work to actively suppress and downplay information about the extent of China's sinister election meddling, covering it up from both the president and the American people like nobody thought was possible. U.S. spy agencies began learning about the compromise of voter registration files in 2020 when they discovered that tens of millions of voter data, think of that, tens of millions of voters' data in 18 states have been bought, stolen, or hacked by China. Yet those responsible for sounding the alarm instead kept the information secret and hidden. They did not disclose to me as president or to anyone else, and to the best of our knowledge, they did not inform Congress. In fact, all they kept saying is, this is the most secure election in the history of our country, a standard, very pat line that was divvied out to say. The cover-up of this colossal security breach is even more disturbing in light of the additional information showing that China engaged in other election-related activities to undermine my first administration and our 2020 campaign. They did not want, and they just didn't want it. They fought like hell not to have it, Donald Trump, to win, and for good reason. As the documents we are releasing show, CIA reporting explicitly stated, and I quote, in mid-2018, the Chinese Communist Party's policy was to leverage all domestic and foreign elements that were opposed to the U.S. president in an effort to reduce the U.S. president's votes and make him resign or prevent his re-election. Isn't that nice? Also, in mid-2018, China was working to influence the results of the U.S. midterm elections and later the results of the 2020 presidential election itself. Separately, in mid-2019, the Chinese government's strategy against the United States was focused on undermining domestic confidence in the U.S. president. They wanted to just make you sound like your president wasn't so hot, when actually your president has done a great job, and they did everything possible to do exactly that. Going on, this document says, and this is by the CIA, the strategy included efforts to use Chinese contacts with big U.S. companies to influence U.S. business leaders to turn against the President of the United States of America. The Chinese government sought to identify U.S. journalists who had reported negatively on the U.S. president and pay them large sums of money to write more negative articles about him, as many as they could, and they didn't care what they said. The Chinese government wanted U.S. president to lose the next election, and the reason they wanted me to lose is because they knew I was wise to them, charged them billions and billions of dollars worth of tariffs, and built the strongest military anywhere in the world. We have the strongest military anywhere in the world. These are exact quotes from the CIA reporting. The name of the person doing the quote is now under review, but it gets even worse. Raw intelligence obtained by the FBI in 2020, yet buried by rogue bureaucrats, stated that China's activities even included an attempt to manufacture illegal ballots for Joe Biden. Documents show that during this period, dozens of significant CIA and NSA reports about China's election targeting were kept out of the presidential briefing. These were briefings I would get almost every day. Everything was kept out that was of importance. One email among intelligence analysts admitted that they had, quote, deliberately massaged the presidential daily briefing to withhold information regarding Chinese activities related to the election. Another official inside the FBI wrote that she was running, quote, a shadow government, unquote, to keep intelligence about China's election meddling from becoming known and to keep it away from the honorable press. Other officials who witnessed such efforts perceived the motivations to be blatantly political. Recently, we found significant numbers of burn bags in formation, and this is a group of bags that were used to destroy information given by President Barack Hussein Obama to be burned. It was supposed to be burned. These bags were supposed to be at a different level by different people, incinerated and checked, but it never happened. Maybe we got lucky. We believe this was not done on purpose, but rather through gross incompetence of the people that were supposed to burn the bags. But the findings are stunning. Today, I'm asking the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, the Department of Justice, the FBI, and the CIA to investigate how and why such crucial information was hidden, to fire those involved in the cover-up, and to file criminal charges, if appropriate, against these people. Yet concealing China's meddling was only the beginning. The third set of documents we are releasing proves that for many years, Americans were blatantly lied to about the security of our election infrastructure, including electronic voting machines and ballot counting systems. Dishonest, almost all. They're vulnerable and they're easily compromised, and people within our government knew that. Tonight, we're publishing a series of previously classified U.S. intelligence community assessments and other reports proving that our government has long known these machines are extremely exposed to attack. As one assessment states, we judge that the United States adversaries, including at a minimum Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, as well as non-state groups, have the capability to compromise U.S. election infrastructure. That's unquote, but that's some statement, isn't it? Made by supposedly great patriots of our country. The document goes on to further state that, quote, we assess that centralized election-related data repositories, such as voter registration databases, poll books, and other official election websites, are most vulnerable to exploitation, and adversaries could use this access to these systems to disrupt election processes within the United States of America. Tonight, we're releasing all of those findings, and spanning from January 2020 to June 2026. This is a cyber threat aimed at the very heart of our democracy. Many people have questioned whether it could actually be possible to electronically manipulate vote totals or change election results on these terrible machines. Today, we are releasing documents that show the CIA obtained reporting of a specific plot to do a big number in favor of the corrupt Maduro regime in Venezuela. And that's exactly what happened, conspiring to digitally rig their own country's elections in 2020, and that's what they did. This reporting included precise details about methods to regime develop to digitally alter vote totals in ways that could not be detected even with an audit, no matter how deep they went. This intelligence underscores why we must take urgent action to ensure that our own system can never, ever be hacked or compromised like it was in the past. The fourth set of documents reveals that even when significant evidence of fraud has been detected, it has been buried and covered up. Among the disclosures tonight are FBI files detailing evidence of alleged fraud by a large-scale voter registration operation in Michigan. In 2020, Michigan State Police raided a Democrat Get Out the Vote organization, corrupt group in Muskegon. And we're so concerned by what they found. They were just so concerned, they couldn't believe it, actually, that they contacted the FBI in Detroit. The documents state that some canvassers admitted to FBI agents that they signed voter registration forms in other people's names, submitted fraudulent registration for people who did not exist, and received gift cards tied to their number of applications that they produced. In other words, it was pay, play, and cheat. The FBI agents working on the case believe that crimes were committed, yet the Biden Department of Justice slow-walked the investigation and killed it. Tonight, I'm asking the FBI director to ensure that the matter is fully investigated and to work with the Department of Justice to prosecute those responsible for any crimes. Finally, to reveal just how vulnerable our elections continue to be, we are releasing the results of a stunning investigation by the Department of Homeland Security. According to the DHS review, state voter rolls and public records, they identified approximately 278,000 non-citizens who are registered to vote in federal elections. Since Democrat states refuse to share their voter files, the real number is actually much higher than that. Yet, even this limited analysis found more than 250,000 foreigners illegally registered to vote. Put together, these disclosures reveal an election system so broken and so vulnerable that no one can possibly defend it. It is not defensible. Hundreds of millions of U.S. voter files are in the hands of foreign governments. Our machines and ballot counting systems are exposed to hacking and manipulation and corruption. China and other countries have been trying to meddle in our elections. Evidence of fraud has been buried. Hundreds of thousands of non-citizens and dead people are listed and active on the voter rolls, and yet we still have elections with no voter ID, no proof of citizenship, and tens of millions of ballots floating aimlessly through the mail. As one example of the insanity, California's recent election for mayor of LA and governor was held on June 2nd, a long time ago, but it was just completed a few days ago on July 10th. Think of that, much more than 1 month. Took a month to count the votes. I wonder what they were doing. This is worse than any third world country. There's no third world country that has elections like we have. In a rare move, NBC and ABC Fake News have both said that they would not cover this speech. They knew what it was about because of the fact that they don't like the topic, because they know how corrupt our system is and they don't want to reveal it. They and others in the media are part of a plot. They want to continue this fraud for whatever reason. They want to keep it going. They want to protect the radical left. They can't have a great country, and that's true. You can't have a great country without free and fair elections. Fraud like this should mean a revocation of their licenses. They use our public multi-billion-dollar in value airways for absolutely no money. They pay nothing. All we want is honesty in our elections and honesty in reporting. They pay nothing for multi-billion-dollar assets. Great damage has been done to our country. Our elections were left vulnerable to being rigged and stolen, and the trust of the American people was lost. This cannot be allowed to continue. Every American, whether you're a Republican, Democrat, Independent, or otherwise, should be able to agree that we deserve the most secure, honest, and fair election system anywhere in the world. Secure elections should be a partisan, really, we should be together, Democrats, Republicans, Independents, everybody, and it should not be a partisan issue. It should cause to unite us, not to divide us. This should be a cause. We should be united, not divided. In light of the brand new and irrefutable information I have revealed tonight, my administration is in the process of notifying the states whose election data was compromised by the People's Republic of China and many others. We will be working closely to mitigate any harm, and we're taking swift action to ensure that sensitive voter data is better protected so we can never be bought, we can never be hacked, and we can never watch a stolen election again. Tomorrow, the Secretary of Homeland Security will hold a briefing to outline his department's recent work confirming cyber vulnerabilities in our electronic voting systems. They are bad. We're in the process of informing governors, senators, and members of Congress of potential issues in their states. If you look at voting today, it's in such bad shape in so many states, and we are committing to fix it. And we're also committing to be working with those states and local jurisdictions to help them fix and patch known technical vulnerabilities before the midterm elections. We have very important elections coming up. We want those elections to be honest. I've also ordered DHS to notify every state about non-citizens on their voter rolls and direct them to remove all ineligible voters from the lists immediately. But most importantly, addressing this crisis of election security demands that Congress must pass the Save America Act. How easy is that to do unless you want to cheat? The only reason you wouldn't do it is you want to cheat because your policies are so bad and your candidates are so pathetic that you can't get away or can't get elected any other way. This landmark bill requires that all voters must show photo voter ID. How simple is that? Could I have your photo, please? Photo voter ID. All voters must provide proof of citizenship. Are you a citizen of our country, please? And hopefully there will be no corrupt mail-in ballots, which if you watched California and so many other places, mail-in ballots are inherently corrupt. So you would have no mail-in ballots except for illness, disability, military deployment, or travel if you're going away on business or vacation. These reforms are urgently needed to stop the vulnerabilities that I've mentioned. To all Americans, I ask you to pick up your phone tomorrow, call your representatives in the House and Senate, and demand that they pass the Save America Act without delay. Together, we will restore faith and confidence in our country, and we will be bigger, better, and stronger than ever before. Thank you. God bless you. God bless our great military, and God bless America. Thank you very much.
All right, Donald Trump speaking about what he says is a compromised voting system in the United States, Chinese actors who are involved in hacking. He talked about a lot of things, and we're going to go to some people to help analyze and react to what we've just heard. Let's begin with Julia Wong, who's standing by live in Washington. You know, Julia, I was making notes. Hard to keep up with that stream of consciousness from the president, and hard to make sense of some of the things he said. But what's your reaction to what you just heard?
Yeah, Ian, you're right. There's a lot of information to digest from that roughly, 25-minute speech that we just heard from the president. I was also taking notes. I'm going to be referencing them during this conversation with you, just because there was so much involved in what the president had to say. We're going to try to get through this together. The first being the president saying that the People's Republic of China was involved in a large compromise of voter data. It's him saying more than 200 million American voter files have been compromised as a result. This includes names, addresses, political party affiliations. He also said that China was engaged in other election-related activities to try to undermine his first presidency, to try to undermine his campaign in 2020 when he was running against Joe Biden. The president also touched on how Americans had been lied to about the security of their election system, saying that foreign agents like China, Iran, North Korea, non-state actors have the ability to compromise U.S. elections infrastructure. And this is something that experts have said multiple times in the past, that this elections infrastructure is safe, that it can be trusted. But here you see the president directly trying to undermine confidence in how Americans vote. He also touched on files that he says are from the FBI that show that there was fraud on a large scale when it came to voter registration in the state of Michigan, which we know is a swing state, where he says that there was information on people who did not exist. He also says that there was investigation done by the Department of Homeland Security that showed close to 800,000 non-citizens were registered to vote in federal elections. So the president taking all of this to say, and in his mind, show that there are vulnerabilities in the election system here in the United States. That he says people are voting when they should not be voting, that non-American citizens are able to cast ballots in elections. And all of this is critically important because we are only just a few months away from the midterm elections in November. This is something that Trump has been focused on. We know that he is seeing low polling results. We know that the Democrats are being quite aggressive in how they want to take over both chambers of Congress. And what we heard from the president tonight is that the way to solve all these issues, he says these issues, would be if Congress were to pass the Save America Act. If passed, this would require voters to show their proof of citizenship as they register to vote, and it would also require them to show photo ID when they are voting. There have been criticisms that measures like this would suppress the vote in the United States, that it would block eligible Americans from being able to cast their ballots. But what we're hearing from Donald Trump is that if this is not done, if Congress does not pass this act, that means that people want to cheat. And these are very strong words coming from the U.S. president, and clearly they're meant to invoke a little bit of fear and concern on the part of Americans. He also says that there will be no mail-in ballots unless there's illness, military deployment, or travel. And what he is saying is that if these measures are taken, in his mind, this would create some secure election results that Americans can trust. Again, this is a very heated, divisive thing, particularly as we are just a few months away from the midterm elections. The president clearly taking some prime time tonight to make this address to Americans, hoping that with this, what he says is evidence that backs up all these claims, that he's able to persuade members of Congress to then pass this act that he has been so very much behind.
Okay, Julie Wong in Washington, thank you. Speaking of prime time, the president pointing out that ABC and NBC, two of the networks in the United States, was not taking this live. And then he went on to suggest that the reason they weren't taking it live is because they know about the corruption in the election system and they are trying to cover it up. And then he went on to talk about how those networks have access to the public airwaves, a very valuable commodity, and that kind of maybe implying that they should lose their broadcast licenses. There was this kind of almost stream of consciousness when there'd be a point and then another point and then another point, and it's just hard to keep track of how you connect all the dots in what he's saying, though from afar, if you don't pay attention to the details, his general message is corruption, deep state, Democrats, system shouldn't be trusted. But then when you start focusing in on the details, I think there are a lot of questions that are left unanswered. Let's go to J.C. Planis now in Miami, former Republican state legislator, now a Democrat. Where do you want to start, J.C.? What do you make of what you just heard?
I think NBC missed out. This speech was funnier than most of the comedies on that network. Listen, where to start? First of all, Chinese accessed voter files. Guess what? These are the same voter files that every single political candidate and that every single political party already has. What? They got a copy of public voter files? What were they going to do? Send campaign mail pieces to voters? And in fact, he even said that in the speech. He said, oh, they could campaign. Well, we saw that in 2016 with Russia. Russia was doing a campaign for Trump in 2016. And we knew that the Chinese had gone into the systems. This was public in March of 2021 in the intelligence briefing. He really goes all out saying that people didn't tell him this. His own, intelligence agencies didn't tell him this, and he says it was part of the deep state. No, it was probably because some of these things that were looked at were so remote that they weren't anything. I also don't doubt it that he was told and didn't remember, because he notoriously does not pay attention to these briefings. Like I said before, this is all about trying to rig the 2026 election. He's trying to force changes down people's throat that are going to make it harder to vote.
Okay, let's play a clip actually that connects to what you were just saying from the speech, and then I'll come back to you.
Over a period of years, starting during the 2020 election cycle, the People's Republic of China carried out what is believed to be the largest compromise of election data in history, resulting in China's illicit acquisition of 220 million U.S. voter files. That information includes names, addresses, phone numbers, political party preferences, and other sensitive data that would be needed to register to vote and engage in other nefarious activities, which is exactly what was happening.
All right, so Donald Trump says there's been this hack by the Chinese, but here's the thing. He goes further than that, as you just pointed out. He says the deep state, whoever that is, whatever that is, the deep state covered up the Chinese hacking of the voters list. And so
the Chinese didn't need to hack it. They could have walked into any elections office in America and bought the list. I can tell you right now, because in both parties, I've walked door to door for candidates with a phone app that has the list of the voters that were walking and has way more information than Donald Trump is saying there. The Republican National Committee has more information on voters than Trump is saying that the Chinese hacked.
Yeah, so that's point number one, right? So if there was a hack, did it actually expose significant information to the Chinese? Secondly, when he says the deep state covered it up, again, who is he talking about? Is that even true? If it is true, then why was there in fact a cover-up of which we have absolutely no evidence of? I mean, I think about another thing that he talked about, burn bags that were supposed to have documents that were destroyed. No, that by the Obama administration. Did that actually happen? What was in those? He never said specifically. He suggested that what was in those unburned bags was stunning, but he didn't go a step further. So, like, you have 27 minutes.
Sense.
No,
None of
it
that
doesn't.
makes sense.
But if you listen to it in totality, it's easy. It's easy to kind of hear this message of corruption.
Let me focus on the hundreds of thousands of non-citizens registered to vote. Number one, he didn't say that they voted. He said they're registered. It seems to me that they are looking at lists and picking out names that probably sound foreign, and they're accusing them of being non-citizens. This is a complete, just crazy allegation, because everybody who registers to vote signs that they are a citizen. Yeah, every once in a while, out of a group of 800,000 that we had, and I spoke to the supervisor of elections of Tampa, a city here in Florida. He said that he gets about 100 applications a year of non-citizens. And they register because they're at a voter registration drive, which, by the way, another thing that Trump brought up, and somebody gives them a form and they just sign it. There's also a lot of people who don't know that they're not citizens. Their parents brought them when they were little, and they've always thought they were citizens. But guess what? Those people get stopped by the system and they don't vote. So this thought of these hundreds of thousands of registered, if any of them supposedly would have voted, like they would have known. Anybody who votes, when you pull a voter file, you know when that person cast the ballot and what form. If somebody voted by mail, if somebody voted in person early voting, if some person voted on election day, that is all public record. So if these supposed non-citizens had voted, we'd know about it. There are so many more questions than answers in all of this.
Yeah. Okay, let's leave it there. J.C. Planis, election attorney.
Thank you, Ian.
Yeah, thank you very much. Really appreciate your analysis. That is another interesting thing about what we heard tonight is the questions raised without answers. You would think that Trump would time this so that these things could have been investigated, could have been answered before he revealed these shocking secrets as it was described to us. Caroline Heldman, professor of political science at Occidental College in California, was with us before the speech, joins us again now. She, I guess, let me start with your reaction to what you heard.
Well, I want those 25 minutes back because it was a bait and switch. We were promised new information. We didn't get new information, right? We got a rehash of things from security reports in 2021 that clearly documented that China was targeting us with a massive campaign and got their hands on publicly available documents. The Michigan claims have already been investigated. We've known about these. And so other than like some unsubstantiated claims that are not backed up with evidence, we didn't hear anything new. And I think most importantly, I guess maybe 2 points, Donald Trump said that cyber hacking and foreign attacks are a big threat, which they are. And I appreciate him spreading that gospel. But at the end of the day, the SAVE Act does nothing to address foreign hacks. It is about internal people going to vote at the polls. It's not about foreign hacks. It's not about cybersecurity. And perhaps most importantly, since he took office the second time, has cut the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency by 30%. So he has hampered efforts to investigate cyber attacks and hackers at the same time he says these are the big threats. So I'm left a little confused, and yeah, I want that time back.
Caroline, let's play a clip from the speech, and I'll come back to you right after.
This landmark bill requires that all voters must show photo, voter ID. How simple is that? Could I have your photo, please? Photo, voter ID. All voters must provide proof of citizenship. Are you a citizen of our country, please? And hopefully there will be no corrupt mail-in ballots, which if you watched California and so many other places, mail-in ballots are inherently corrupt. So you would have no mail-in ballots except for illness, disability, military deployment, or travel if you're going away on business or vacation.
So, Caroline, he builds a case, he thinks, for not having mail-in ballots, except in very limited circumstances, and requiring voter ID. What do you think the real motive is behind those two things?
Well, I think Donald Trump thinks that requiring voter ID and not allowing mail-in ballots is somehow going to benefit Republicans. And in fact, I think the speech tonight was actually aimed at Senate Republicans. He wants them to pass the SAVE Act. But the reason that they're not moving on this is it is not entirely clear it's going to benefit them. In fact, it might harm them. So those two components, let's take them. The Brennan Center for Justice finds that about 8% of Democrats and about 9% of Republicans will not have access to documents required to vote. It's a small number, but it's about even for both parties. So it's probably going to affect, we never want people to not be able to vote, but it's going to affect the parties about the same. But most importantly, there are a lot more rural voters on the Republican side. So if he gets rid of mail-in ballots, that means that he is disadvantaging his political party, which is why Senate Republicans won't pass this. And just quickly, like, I'm offended as a California voter. We have excellent elections, and the reason they take so long is two things. One, because we allow mail-in ballots that are postmarked the day of the election, so some arrive a few days later, and we're a massive state, 40 million Americans here. But the second thing is we cure these ballots, we check them, we look at them to make sure that they are valid, that the right person has voted and that they've signed it in the right way. So Donald Trump, again, just bringing all of this back, how is this going to protect us against cyber attacks? I wish he would actually focus resources and attention on that.
I'm looking at one of the notes I wrote here, and I had him saying, and I think this is an exact quote. If it's not exact, it's very close to it. We must take action to make sure that machines, he means those voting machines, not be compromised like they were in the past. I mean, you look at the defamation suit that Dominion Voting Machines started against Fox, and that Fox ended up agreeing to a settlement so that it wouldn't end up going to a verdict. A settlement of what? Just under $800 million, one of the biggest, if not the biggest, defamation awards or settlements made by a media company. It just seems like there were these big points that were made that aren't that clearly made, and then these little comments that are made that I think are intended to undermine kind of faith in the system. But what's your sense of that?
I think that's absolutely the goal here. I mean, he was just throwing spaghetti at the wall to see what would stick. You have the timeline jumps from Obama, then claiming the Chinese hacking only, their efforts to compromise our elections only started in 2020. We have ample evidence that they started at least a decade earlier. He's all over the place in terms of saying, well, it's cyber hacking, but no, we need voter ID. So I do think that his bigger message, his underlying message, was loud and clear, which is that we shouldn't trust our elections, which is paving the way for what will happen in November when he tries to openly challenge the outcome of an election that is likely to give the House to Democrats and possibly the Senate. And this is a man who's well underwater, right? He's at about a 35% approval rating, which is about 20 points lower than the average since World War II for presidents at this time. He's underwater with Iran. 2/3 of Americans don't like what ICE is doing. 3/4 of Americans don't like what's happening with the economy. So Donald Trump actually started the speech pretty strong for his Republican Party by talking about his Trump accounts, talking about the fact that inflation has not gone up, and in fact is pretty low, but not going up the way that many people thought it might. He made a pitch for his prescription drug prices. He falsely claimed that we're paying less than anywhere else in the world, which isn't true. But, he started off strong with that agenda. It almost immediately went into really going after our free and fair elections. And this is a decade of eroding our democracy, having him doing this messaging.
Caroline Heldman of Occidental College, joining us from Los Angeles. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Sam Martin was also watching the president's speech, perhaps with a slightly different take. She specializes in public addresses and political communications at the Frank Church Institute at Boise State University. Professor Martin, thank you for making time for us on this Thursday evening. As you looked at the speech staged as it was in the Oval Office, what do you make of that?
Well, I mean, it was different. He didn't sit behind the Resolute desk, so I thought that was something that people were wondering if he was going to do, and he didn't. So I think that changes the nature of the Oval Office address a little bit. Some of the most important speeches in history that have been made to the American people in moments of crisis: George W. Bush on 9/11, Ronald Reagan after the Challenger exploded. Even Joe Biden in the aftermath of the assassination attempt on Donald Trump in 2024, they made a different choice about that. And, whether or not, I thought it was significant that he didn't sit behind the desk. Other than that, it's a sort of strange strategic time. I agree with your previous guest. It's a strange strategic time to see this speech coming out, and it raises a lot of questions about if this is the first move in a sort of larger presidential chess match or presidential agenda around the upcoming midterm election, or if this was just a moment to stop and say, hey, pass this act and let's make sure we have a safe election in November. We'll have to wait and see.
I feel like there was a time that when the President of the United States said that he was going to make a primetime address, the networks, the U.S. TV networks, understood that it was an important event, that it needed to be covered, and so they would set aside time in their primetime schedule to cover it. Of course, as you know, tonight, the American TV networks were at the very most conflicted, although in some cases I think made a clear decision not to carry this live on the air. What do you make of that?
Yeah, I mean, it's not unprecedented, certainly, that networks choose or opt out of covering a primetime address. When Barack Obama wanted to get immigration reform and started talking about the DREAM Act and Dreamers and things like that, he made a primetime address and asked the networks for time, and the networks did not, for the most part, cover that speech. I remember that ABC refused to preempt Grey's Anatomy in favor of Barack Obama wanting to speak about what to do about Dreamers in the United States and about immigration reform. And I think that speaks largely to both our changed media environment and our more highly politicized culture. There was a time when, certainly if we think back to the 1980s, the 1970s, the 1960s, even the early 1990s, when, cable TV wasn't extremely ubiquitous, when streaming services weren't ruling the day, and when the networks sort of had this enormous public privilege, and Donald Trump even referenced that in his speech tonight. They had this enormous public privilege of sort of being leased the public airways, and that still is true, right? There is still a kind of sending the message over the airwaves, and so if I have an antenna, I can still see, the big three networks, Fox, whatever. But most people are not getting their media that way, and the networks know it. And so the way that people are getting it is they're paying for it. So that's the first thing that's different. And the second thing that's different is even more important, and let me just say it really quickly, which is that the so-called mainstream media, the big three media, whomever, they don't trust that the purpose in the past of a primetime address was to do something like talk about 9/11, to talk about the Challenger explosion, to talk about something that Americans across the board likely, and world citizens likely had an interest in and even shared a concern about. Now there's a feeling that presidents are always campaigning, always politicking, and that executives feel is not the purpose of a presidential address on prime time. It's not a reason to lose money, and it's certainly not a reason to lose viewers. And they are worried about losing viewers every minute of every day of their lives, those executives.
Yeah, really smart analysis. Sam Martin of Boise State University, thank you very much.
Appreciate it.
So we have a CBC fact check team that was furiously working and feeding our digital site on fact checking, and Beneat Braich, who's here in the newsroom with me, was watching what they were coming up with. Tell us what you got there, Beneat.
Are. The most shocking claim, if it's true, accuses China of trying to interfere in the 2020 presidential election, hacking into voter files, and the members of the American intelligence community covering it up, according to Trump. Now, he claims that the election meddling goes back years to the 2020 presidential election and the 2018 midterms, and that China acquired voter registration of tens of millions of Americans. So two people who were familiar with that issue told Reuters that voter data is not confidential. It's already available to political consultants to use for election materials, and that it can't be manipulated. Up until now, U.S. intelligence officials have repeatedly said there is no evidence to suggest China or any other foreign adversary manipulated votes in 2020 as well. And then there was also another attempt in 2021 where U.S. intelligence community assessment found no indication that any foreign actor attempted or succeeded in any technical aspect of the 2020 election. So that includes voter registrations, ballots, or even the results.
Okay, and at CBCNews.ca, there's more of this fact-checking, which has been going on, and those of you who are watching can click on that. Beneat, thank you very much. Okay, let's wrap up our coverage of this speech with A conversation with a couple of political consultants. Laura Fink is a Democratic strategist in San Diego, and in Washington we have Ali Samarco, currently a Democratic consultant after leaving the Republican Party in 2020. Thanks to both of you for sticking around on this evening. Ali, how did this speech land with you as someone who was a Republican just a few years ago?
Yeah, not well. I mean, it was a little bit all over the place, per usual. To me, it just seems like we're again feeding a narcissistic man's delusions that could be better served in therapy and not on the global stage. But of course, he used the speech to try to push the SAVE Act through the House and the Senate, which he's been trying to do to change the rules before the 2026 midterms. And he tried to shove it through in a housing bill, and that didn't work. And so this was his next attempt to do so. And he says that if you don't support the SAVE Act, it's because your ideas are unpopular and you're not electable. And I say, every accusation is a projection, and it's quite the opposite, and that he's trying to push through the SAVE Act because he knows that the Republican Party's current platform and their current popularity is extremely unfavorable, and he knows that their election chances are very grim this fall.
Yeah, you mentioned speeches all over the place. I usually find it very easy to analyze a speech. They're kind of delivered in point form by most people. I can follow that. When Trump speaks, I have a hard time following the points because of the way that they are all over the place. Laura, what was your reaction to what you heard?
Well, I might be schooled in the media ecosystem of the right a little too much, because it was quite coherent to me. If you were a MAGA voter, they were the greatest hits and accusations, from non-citizen voting to dead people on the rolls to mail-in ballots being fraudulent. And so if you're hardwired in those conspiracy theories, all of these accusations are familiar to you, including the foreign intervention. You'll note that he didn't share any evidence that would run counter or would have affected the overall outcome of these elections. And he only focused on elections where Republicans in 2018 or he himself in 2020 lost. No focus on 2024 or any issues with election security spoken about there. So I think it's very clear that he wants federal intervention in the upcoming elections in 2026 and 2028. And this is his roadmap for doing so.
That's such an interesting point, because it is true, to an extent. If you just play the hits, mention the sound bites that your supporters are going to listen to favorably, maybe that's enough. I'm going to come to both of you after I play this clip. Speaking of sound bites, greatest hits, voting machines. Let's listen to what Trump had to say about that tonight.
The third set of documents we are releasing proves that for many years, Americans were blatantly lied to about the security of our election infrastructure, including electronic voting machines and ballot counting systems. Dishonest, almost all. They're vulnerable and they're easily compromised, and people within our government knew that. Tonight, we're publishing a series of previously classified U.S. intelligence community assessments and other reports proving that our government has long known these machines are extremely exposed to attack.
All right, let's start with you, Laura. React to that.
Well, again, it just seems to come, it's part and parcel of an agenda that is not the American people's agenda, not even a Republican agenda, to work on these baseless accusations of interference in election outcomes. And I think that this focus, a lot of people in the Republican Party are shaking their heads and wondering what he's doing, given their their disadvantage in the upcoming elections, their failure to speak to affordability issues, and the real challenges they will confront at the ballot box in just a few months with Donald Trump's choices to start the war in Iran, levy tariffs that impact kitchen table issues, and all of the headwinds that they will face. So I think this is a real miss on his part, but it is sort of his pet project and pet grievance that we see his executive power amply able to focus on, given the Supreme Court's latitude and enshrining of an expansion of those powers.
Ali, last comment to you.
Yeah, you know, his focus on the voting machines is interesting because he also simultaneously is attacking mail-in voting. So it almost seems like he just doesn't want people to vote altogether, which we know historically benefits Republicans. So it's just laughable. And, you know, if everything he said was true in the 2020 election, why wouldn't it be also true in the 2024 election and midterms in between then? He can't answer that question. So, you know, I think if he wants to talk about corruption, we should talk about himself and how he is extremely corrupt in the way that he's pumping stocks, buying stocks, and then pumping them out loud, you know, on TV, and then pushing his own crypto platform where he's profited billions of dollars. So, look, I think we have plenty of ways to talk about corruption. I don't think we need to rehash the 2020 election. We have a lot of other things that require more of our attention, and it's quite embarrassing at this point. We all just need to move on from it.
Ali Samarco in Washington, Laura Fink in San Diego. I appreciate not only that you stayed up with us this late, but also your analysis. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I'm Ian Hannamansing in Vancouver. So that was our special coverage of Donald Trump's primetime address. Thank you very much for watching, and our coverage will continue, as you can see, on CBCNews.ca, including the fact-checking of tonight's speech, the contents of tonight's speech, and all the analysis that we provided for you over the last 35 minutes. Thank you very much.